Hey guys, you're listening to the Pravda English podcast. It's already a tradition that at the beginning of almost every episode, I explain where the idea for the topic came from. So let's stick to this tradition this time as well. This is the second summer in a row that I've organized a summer speaking camp. The main idea of this camp is to help people overcome the barrier and the fear of speaking English, help them feel comfortable communicating with the new people, and help them express their thoughts more easily and naturally. I know that in summer, no one wants to study intensively, so we created a light format. I sent the guys some videos to watch, some articles to read, and some podcasts to listen to. Then we meet in small groups to discuss the topics I've prepared for them. You know me, I don't like to repeat myself. I'm not into using the same materials or topics over and over again. That's why for each project, for each summer camp, I come up with new topics. To find inspiration, I usually look through popular magazines, chat with ChatGPT, and scroll through YouTube videos. I try to find topics that are relevant today and that people are actively discussing. When I was preparing for the third week of the summer speaking camp, I realized that one of the most common trends is that people nowadays romanticize the past in movies, TV series, fashion, music, and on social media. People are using film cameras, wired earphones, and vinyl record players again. I see a lot of fashionable girls in the city wearing outfits from the 90s and the early 2000s. There are a lot of reels where people miss the past, remember their lives back then, and say that life was better. I decided to find out why people want to go back in time. I tried to understand whether life in the past was actually better than it is today, or if we simply feel that the best period of our lives is already gone. This is how a new topic for the summer speaking camp and for this podcast appeared. Today, we will compare life in the past and life nowadays by looking at different aspects. Of course, the past is a very broad term, so I'll focus mainly on my grandparents and parents' youth based on their stories. The first aspect we will look at is the cost of living and personal finances. Nowadays, everyone complains about inflation and high housing prices. Young people say that they have no idea how many years they'll have to work to afford even a small apartment of 30 or 40 square meters, and of course, with a mortgage, not in cash. On the other hand, our grandparents often got apartments for free. They could work at a factory, and after a few years, when it was their turn, they could get an apartment. One of my students shared that her grandma had the chance to get two apartments, but they decided to take only one because they didn't need the second one. Now it's hard to imagine a situation like that. I agree that nowadays housing prices are ridiculous, but at the same time, I can't say that it's absolutely impossible to buy a flat. Maybe it really depends on the country, the conditions, and the interest rate the bank offers. I've heard that in Russia and in Belarus, mortgage interest rates can be more than 17 or even 20%. At the same time, in Poland, the interest rate is usually around 3, 5 or at most 7%. So the monthly cost of renting an apartment and paying for your own mortgage is often quite similar. Of course, in many cases, you first need to save a down payment of 10 or 20%, but I also have some acquaintances here in Poland who didn't have any down payment and still managed to get a mortgage. I come from a small city in Belarus, and a lot of my classmates and friends lived in houses. It wasn't such a big deal to build a private house, but now buying a house in Poland is something that seems nearly impossible. First, you need to buy land, and that alone costs an arm and a leg. Second, you need to buy building materials. Okay, this point is fine because nowadays we have a great choice and you can choose the materials based on your budget. But then comes the third point, the cost of labor, like builders, electricians, plumbers, and so on. Oh my God, we paid an unbelievable amount of money for renovating our relatively small apartment, even though there was nothing particularly complicated about the work and the apartment was brand new. So, when it comes to building a house, I cannot even imagine how much it would cost. In many cases, it makes sense to do as much as you can yourself because you'll save a lot of money. So, on the one hand, it seems like housing was more affordable in the past. Now we pay enormous amount of money for really tiny flats. But at the same time, let's look at it from a different perspective. People in the past didn't travel as much as we do nowadays. They grew vegetables and fruit in their gardens. Many people kept animals for meat, chickens for eggs, and cows or goats for milk. They hardly ever bought new things because it was simply impossible to find much in stores. For example, my grandma sewed and knitted many clothes for her family herself. Nowadays, we go to cafes and drink coffee, okay, not every day maybe, but definitely every week. We travel a couple of times a year. We can open an online shop, buy anything in the middle of the night, and have it delivered the next day. We don't grow our own food anymore. We order takeaways, meal delivery, and eat out. We pay for the gym and different sports classes. We have phones, computers, cars, tablets, TVs, and so on. Our grandparents couldn't have imagined this kind of life. So, yeah, on the one hand, the housing situation is a bit disappointing. But on the other hand, guys, let's not forget that our purchasing power has skyrocketed. The second aspect is love, relationships, and dating. I'm not going to talk about the times when families chose your spouse. Of course, that happened, but in our part of the world, it disappeared centuries ago. I know that both of my grandmothers married the man they chose and loved with all their hearts. What I find interesting is that they both met my grandfathers at village parties. Someone in the village would organize a party at their house and invite an accordion player. All the young people would gather there to dance and socialize. But they weren't alone. Some older women, including grandmothers, would also be there. They were like security guards. While the young people were dancing and chatting, the older women would sit there watching them, making sure everything was going well, commenting on everyone's outfits, and discussing who would make a good couple. When I imagine this scene today, it feels, to be honest, ridiculous. But for our grandparents, it was completely normal. One of my grandmothers told me that after she met my grandfather, he went into the army for 2 or 3 years. I don't remember exactly. And during that time, they only saw each other once or twice and communicated almost entirely through letters. She said that for her, no other man existed. She waited faithfully for him whole time. And when he came back from the army, they got married almost immediately, and the following year, my uncle was born. It seems that people had much fewer options back then. They could only marry someone from your own village or a neighboring one. If a guy didn't drink, he was already considered a good potential husband. And if he was handy, that was another huge advantage. And if he was a little bit more handsome than a monkey, well, that was a jackpot. Nowadays, finding a partner seems like a real challenge. We have unlimited options. You open Instagram or a dating app, and you can scroll forever. Short, tall, bold, guys with surfer hair, IT guys, crypto guys, people who love sports, people who love music, people looking for family, people who don't want a relationship, animal lovers, motorcycle lovers, any nationality, any appearance, any personality, any religion, any values. So the choice is endless. As I mentioned earlier, women in the past had very few criteria when choosing a husband. And that was only if they were under 30. If a woman was over 30, she might agree to marry almost any decent man who showed interest in her simply because otherwise people would gossip, criticize her, and assume that something is wrong with her. Nowadays, women often seem to have an endless list of expectations. He should have a good job with a decent salary, but at the same time, he shouldn't spend all his time at work. He should love children, get along with my mom, be ambitious, be adventurous, be handsome, funny, good at taking Instagram photos, buy me flowers, plan romantic dates, give me presents, understand my emotions, support me, and share parenting equally. And the list goes on and on. At the same time, relationships in the past often lasted a lifetime. People got married and rarely divorced. Nowadays, every second or third marriage struggles to make it to its 10th anniversary. On the one hand, it sometimes feels as if people give up on relationships too easily. Why work through problems if I can just find someone better? Sometimes it seems we've forgotten how to forgive, how to truly listen to each other, how to be a team, and how to get through life's difficulties together. But on the other hand, many people in the past spent their entire lives in deeply unhappy marriages. Some women were afraid to leave alcoholic husbands because they knew society would judge them. And if they already had children, it became even harder. Many believed that no man would want a woman with a child. People stayed in unhappy relationships because they simply had nowhere to go. They had no financial independence, no support, and no real opportunity to start over. They spent decades with partners who didn't appreciate them, didn't value them, didn't understand them, and with whom they had very little in common, all because divorce was considered shameful. So, yes, marriages often lasted a lifetime, but what was the real price of those long lasting marriages? What was hidden behind closed doors? As I've said, modern marriages may be more fragile and not always built to last, but perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. Today, people have the freedom to choose themselves, their happiness, and their well being instead of staying in relationships simply because society expects them to. The third aspect that I want to focus on is success and career opportunities. In the past, everything seemed more straightforward. You finished school, went to college or university, graduated, and then worked in the same job for the rest of your life. For example, both my grandma and grandpa worked at the same factory for 40 years. I remember that this factory was their life. They knew all their workers and their families. Another one of my grandmas worked as an accountant for more than 40 years, also at the same company. Nowadays, it's something almost unbelievable. People change jobs, companies, and even professions quite frequently, sometimes every 2 or 3 years. On the one hand, it seems that life was better in the past. People didn't overcomplicate things, they had stability, a predictable future, and could focus more on everyday life and their families. But on the other hand, people could have also been extremely unhappy. They might have felt bored and unmotivated by their jobs. Their salaries were limited and they had fewer opportunities to grow and earn more. Nowadays, I know a lot of people who value more than just money in their jobs. They value opportunities to develop, to do something they are genuinely interested in, the ability to help others, and the chance to work in a motivated team. People aren't afraid to change their field completely at the age of 30, 40, or even 50 and start something from scratch. It's okay to study at any age. It's okay to put yourself out there on social media. I remember that when I was a child, there were many stereotypes about creative professions like singers, dancers, artists, and so on. People believed that if you choose one of these careers, you will starve, have an unstable income, and work in poor conditions. But nowadays, you can choose almost any career you like. If you do your job well, if you become a good specialist, if you know how to present yourself on social media, for example, and if you know how to attract clients, you can build a successful career. Thank you so much, guys, for listening to this episode. I can say that in all times, there were both good and bad things. The point is that we as humans tend to forget the bad things and remember only the good ones after some time. That's why when we look back, it often seems that life was better, brighter, and more exciting. I personally also miss 2018 and 2019, not because I was younger and so on, but let's be realistic. Those years felt better in many ways compared to the situation nowadays. But anyway, I think it's important to focus on good moments and appreciate what we already have. This way, it will be easier for us to deal with all the challenges and obstacles in life. And at the end, I just wanted to say that if you want to boost your speaking skills this summer while discussing interesting and thought provoking topics, I invite you to join our summer speaking camp. It will help you feel confident communicating with new people. You will learn to express your thoughts more easily, and you will find the words you need faster in your mind. We have a flexible schedule, so I promise you will be able to find time for our meetings even in your busy and unpredictable summer plans. More information you can find in the description under this podcast. I'm looking forward to meeting you at the camp. Have a great day, guys, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.